So here we go. And let me do one other thing, get us up on Facebook right now. And the temple is pretty dry. We've had some weird kind of stuff that's coming through the floor by one of the doors. And that's definitely happening. We have to figure out why it's staining the carpet, the rain when it rains, but we'll get to the bottom of that. And other than that, though the synagogue held out really well over these days, there's not a lot of people that have made it today. Sheldon made it today, and he actually had to walk part of the way, but all the way, oh my gosh. How many miles? 2.25 miles. So for those who are too wimpy to make it in, that is astounding. Oh,
Yeah, but he's not old.
yeah. I'm not going to say anything about that because, yeah, you're right. It's all a matter of perspective. But yeah, it was a very wet couple of days. We've had a lot of that lately in the last couple of years. And let me just figure out which camera we're at. Come on, camera, respond. There we go. But yeah, overall, pretty dry here. What's the weather like up there, Rosemary?
Sun's out.
Wow. Well, they're getting some of our bad weather further east right now. They're getting some of what we dealt with over Sunday and Monday. But yeah, it was pretty wet. But I had people calling me and checking on me, which was nice from all around. People were making sure we were staying good. And as I said before, the synagogue held up. That was our biggest concern. And give me 2 seconds while I'm going to get everybody on here. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. I'm just going to go mute 1 sec.
Don't touch that dog. Or that mouse.
All right, it should be good now. And as you can see, I have my label on for Israel. And I was on the phone today with Israel. You can see it's day 1, 2, 3. So I think people are going to just say, why does he have 1, 2, 3 on his shirt today? But unfortunately, it looks like 1, 2, 4. But the good news important news, I don't know. I think it's good news. It's very good news. John Stolman knows this already, but no one else does. And I told John because it actually affects his family directly, though it might affect some of your family directly too. But I know it definitely affects his family. I was on the phone with Israel this morning because, without question, well, I should say, as of today, there's always questions. Our birthright trip is going to Israel. So I know people are kind of shocked. Um, but yeah, as of this morning, they said the trip is definitely going to be different. But this is our sign up for it right here. This is our sign up for our page. So I'm going to be sending this out today. This is our registration page, and this is official. This is going to go out today. So we have a couple of weeks to gather all of our people together, and then they will turn it out to the general public for this LA trip. But this is our Taglit page. So that's a page that takes it to a registration for our trip in particular. So the itinerary is still being worked on. I went over like what, obviously it's different, but for example, in previous birthright trips, volunteering was an option. It's not an option right now. Everyone has to volunteer. So everyone's all the trips help out. We helped out when we went a few years ago. Our group worked at a occupational therapy place in Jerusalem that does it's kind of like a place that does gifts or creates souvenirs, but it's kind of, it's like for people who can't work in other jobs, and they make these kinds of things for tourists, and we helped out there. I think the stuff now is going to be a little bit more dealing with, the volunteering is going to be dealing a little bit more with the war right now that's going on, whatever's happening in June when we go in the summer. But volunteering is required, and there might be places that we can't go to as of right now, but maybe in the future those places will be opened up. And interestingly, they're not around Gaza. They're places in the north. So for example, right now, tour groups cannot go to Sfat. Safed is off right as of right now. That might change by June, but as of right now, no birthright groups, no tourist groups, nobody's going to Sfat. I mean, you can, if you live there, you can go there, but you can't take groups there. That's how close to the border, or however you want to look at it, how much Israel's been affected by it. So all the way to Sfat, they're not letting groups in. So, but I'll definitely keep people apprised of what's going on, and you will know, as I know, and as we get information that we can share. But we are going to share this week the link. I mean, hopefully today. So that's good news. But again, the really good news we want to see is obviously sometime soon an end to the war. Most importantly, to have hostages whose freedoms. I mean, they've been held hostage for 4 months now. Those people come home. So, anyways, we're starting today, chapter 9. We're going to read the last 5 chapters of Hosea, and these chapters, the first 2 sessions we did of Hosea took us through his introduction and his story of his life with his prostitute / adulterous wife and children, and the lessons of adultery and seeing Israel as a unfaithful wife. Today, we're going to move into the last part of Hosea, the last chapters. The middle chapters we did introduced us to Hosea's direct condemnations of Israel and specific laying out the charges and talking about what we know about. But today, we're going to finish with that. And we're going to see Israel compared this week to a son, to a child. So a little different than the wife theme. This one is a child who's gone off the rails, so to speak. So that's what we're going to do today. And and again, that doesn't mean that we're not going to go back to some of the prostitution and some of the adulterous, more male, female couple stuff today. The Nathan's just got here just in time. But yeah, the focus is a little bit on that. And today we're also going to see some interesting flashbacks. Good morning. So that's all right. We're going to see the flashbacks and what we don't see in the Bible a lot, which is references to other parts of the Bible. And that when that happens, it's really, really important because it means that people who are writing these things are familiar with the Bible. It kind of helps us understand the questions of like who wrote the Bible, how old the Bible is. Because if we know somebody is a certain age and we know that this story existed, you know, Hosea lived around 750 BCE. If these stories existed in 750 during the time of Hosea, if he's recounting them, doesn't necessarily mean he read it in the Torah, but it means that the story existed already by that period. So, and also, if there are differences to the way the story appears in the Torah, that's also interesting because it tells us that maybe, you know, people either didn't have the Torah as we have it, which is, at least according to the documentary hypothesis, the case, because according to that, the Torah wasn't finally edited until Ezra's time, and he lives during the time of the return from the Babylonian exile, which would still be about 300 years later. But it does tell us something when the Bible refers to other Bible stuff. So we're going to get to that today. But we're going to begin in chapter 9, and chapter 9 kind of begins with some of the themes and some of the things that we saw earlier in the first section and in the second section that we read last week. So Rosemary, if you'd take it away, or well, before that, any questions or comments or anything before we, because today we're going to finish this first prophet of the we call it the minor prophets, but again, they're not minor, they're just short. They're just short books. Doesn't mean they're not important. All right, so let's take a look. No questions? We'll continue. Rosemary?
Rejoice not, O Israel, as other peoples exult, for you have strayed away from your God. You have loved a prostitute's fee by every threshing floor of new grain.
So there we go back to the prostitute business. But it is not the same. It's not his wife. It's also kind of thrown out there. This is not going to be the whole thing. You're going to see the motif here in chapter 9. It's not prostitutes. If you were looking for sex, sorry, you came to the wrong place. This is all about harvest stuff, agriculture. All right.
Threshing floor and winepress shall not join them, and the new wine shall betray her. They shall not be able to remain in God's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt and shall eat impure food in Assyria.
And again, that's the relationships that these people in the north now have with Egypt and Assyria, with these allies and empires that occasionally, again, are rivals, but they're kind of caught in the middle.
It shall be for them like the food of mourners, all who partake of which are defiled. They will offer no libations of wine to God, and no sacrifices of theirs will please, but their food will be only for their hunger. It shall not come into the house of God. What will you do about feast days, about the festivals of God? Behold, they have gone from destruction with the silver they treasure. Egypt shall hold them fast. Moth shall receive them in burial. Weeds are their heirs. Prickly shrubs occupy their old homes.
Yeah, and if you look at what Moph is, that's probably Memphis. It's kind of a cross between the word Memphis, which is the Greek version of Noph, which is the city in Egypt. But again, these are kinds of, what does it mean to turn to Egypt?
The days of punishment have come for your heavy guilt. The days of requital have come. Let Israel know it. The prophet was distraught, the inspired man driven mad by constant harassment.
That seems to be kind of him, but also maybe any other prophet who knows what's happening. This is, again, reminding everyone, this is early. This is early in the prophetic. Like Hosea is one of the earliest prophets that is a prophet that we have written down. You know, we have Elijah and we have Moses as a prophet, but for the prophets that we know about in the Bible, he's an early prophet. Remember, the important things to remember about who Hosea is: prophet from northern Israel who loves Jerusalem and the throne of David. He's looking back to the glory days of 200 years, 250 years before, which he really thinks was when Israel and when Israel together with Judah were doing it right. So that's very unusual. It's early, but it's also reflecting this idea that we should all be together, and David should be the one in charge.
Ephraim watches for my God. As for the prophet, fowlers' snares are on all his paths, harassment in the house of his God. They have been as grievously corrupt as in the days of Gibeah. God will remember their iniquity and will punish their sins.
Now, this is the first direct response or reference context for something that happened in the Bible. And Gibeah, for those that remember, is one of the worst scenes in the Torah, in the whole Bible. In Jewish history, it's one of the worst scenes. It's the story from Judges chapter 19, which talks about this horrible scene that happened in Gibeah and Benjamin, where a man and his concubine are traveling, and it is essentially the Sodom and Gomorrah story that happens in our place. Actually, some people think that the Sodom and Gomorrah story from Genesis is actually based on this scene, which, according to like what we know, really happened. And again, in the story, the concubine is raped to death, literally killed, raped to death by the people in Gibeah, and then the guy from Ephraim, who's her husband or master or whatever in the power position there, cuts her body up, sends a piece to every tribe, and says, we have to avenge her death. We have to punish Benjamin. And then there's a war against the Benjaminites that a lot of people get killed in, and Benjamin's almost completely wiped out. But it's a really horrific story. And when it says in the days of Gibeah, which is synonymous in the biblical poetry, this doublet, it's grievously corrupt. We're going to see a reference to Sodom and Gomorrah, or I should say the other places of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of the plain, in this text today too. But yeah, here's a reference to something that happened in the Bible. It happened in Judges. So here's a reference to it. I mean, I never doubted that the story happened, and this doesn't prove the story happened. But, and again, you could ask the question, why would someone invent such a horrific story? It's not a story you'd want to tell unless it happened and you can learn from it. But the reference here to it just gives it more belief that this kind of thing happened, that this thing happened pretty close to the way the book of Judges says. Now, again, there's no details in it, but it was horrible, it was corrupt, it was iniquity, it was sinful, bad. So it's there. And this is a reference to something in the Bible, somewhere else in the Bible. In this case, again, the book of Judges. It's not the last, but it's the first one we've read today.
I found Israel as pleasing as grapes in the wilderness. Your ancestors seemed to me like the first fig to ripen on a fig tree. But when they came to Baal Peor, they turned aside to shamefulness. Then they became as detested as they had been loved.
Another reference to a Bible story, right? Baal Peor. What happened in Numbers, book of Numbers, Bamidbar. Just as the people are, again, as we read about them coming into the land of Israel, remember we come to the story of Balaam, who is supposed to curse us, but instead blesses us, and he gives us the, matovu, and we think everything's good. And then the next scene, Israel engages in this cultic prostitution with the Moabites. The Midianites are also drawn into it, by the way. But Baal Peor is a Baal of this place called Peor. But as we know, the Baal Peors, or any Baal, becomes later on, Baal Peor, even Milton refers to Baal Peor as a demon. Any Baal with a name attached to it, they don't even care where the place is anymore, whether it's Baal Zephon, Baal, or as we mentioned, Baal-zebub, Beelzebub, which becomes obviously a demon. All these Baals, well, not all, but a lot of the Baals become demons in later literature. But Baal Peor, what we know about in the book of Numbers is that they worshipped and took part in this horrible act, which of course then prompts a response. There's death and destruction, and God gets very mad. God gets very mad with the people. And it shows that they still, even after the golden calf, they still haven't learned. Now, story is very important. Here it's referenced back to Numbers. Here's another part of the Bible that we refer to. And this part's actually in the Torah. Again, we don't get a lot of details. We don't need to. They refer to it. We know what happened. What's interesting is the previous reference to what happened at Gibeah had nothing necessarily to do with God. It was a horrible ethical violation, right? It was rape, lack of hospitality, death, horrific behaviors, but behaviors of people to people. Baal Peor is about our relationship with God. It's about worshiping and doing something, again, that is turning away from God. Now, again, there was a sexual component to that as well. But this is also an act of betrayal on God. So there's a theological component, there's an ethical behavior component. What we've done wrong is not just we're not worshiping God, or it's not just that we're behaving badly in the way we treat other people. We're doing both. And both of them are referenced here by biblical references that people will know. They knew them. You can talk about them in a way that, again, they don't really have to even get into the details of it. You know what it is.
From birth, from the womb, from conception, Ephraim's glory shall be like birds that fly away. Even if they rear their infants, I will bereave them of everyone. Woe to them indeed when I turn away from them.
Okay, I just want to, I don't want to dwell on it. I just want to focus on the fact that here in Hosea, we have an interesting reference here to the stages of development. So birth, when the child actually comes out, womb is in utero, and then there's conception. Now he's saying it's like they're people aren't even gonna be there. But it's like he went backwards, right? So he went backwards in time. Not a baby that comes out, not a baby that's in the womb, not even the conception. Now, I mean, I don't know that we can make big statements on when life begins here, but there's definitely an understanding that there are stages in the development of a person. And the final one is birth, but when we go back, it's in utero and then it's conception. I mean, it's an interesting phrase because it's a threefold phrase. And if you undo something, if you undo a person's existence to some extent, you could say, well, they're not going to get born, or they die at birth. They could also die in the womb, or they can never have been conceived in the first place. Any of these things are places or steps where we would say somebody could essentially not exist. So they went backwards. It's an interesting phrase.
It shall go with Ephraim as I have seen it go with Tyre, which was planted in a meadow. Ephraim too must bring out his children to slayers. Give them, O Eternal One, give them what? Give them a womb that miscarries and shriveled breasts.
So here is definitely imagery that has to do with someone not being born, not living, not existing. And again, comparing the north to the city of Tyre, which was also occasionally destroyed in war. And in this case, they're referring it to one of the sieges and one of the destructions of Tyre. But during the time of the Assyrians, another reference. Here we go.
Sorry? Oh.
Yeah, it's your reference.
Oh. All their misfortune began at Gilgal, for there I disowned them. For their evil deeds, I will drive them out of my house. I will accept them no more. All their officials are disloyal.
Yep. Now, the one problem here, we're not really sure what this is. And the reason is there are several references to Gilgal in the Bible. And actually, we're not even sure where Gilgal was, or whether there might have been more than one Gilgal, in the sense that Gilgal, what we do know is that Gilgal was one of, or the place Gilgal was one of the places where, and I'll show you just so you can see again why they would say this allusion is uncertain. Let me just show this up here. Is the name of one or more places in the Hebrew Bible. It's mentioned 39 times, quite a few in the book of Joshua, where is a place where the Israelites camped after crossing the River Jordan. Gilgal likely means a circle of stones. Now, Gilgal is a circle, like a circle, comparable to the word circle. So the problem is it could be any place that was a place where people would make a shrine or make a place, and again, it's referenced already in Hosea, but in this part of Hosea, Gilgal is mentioned in the rebuke, saying the Lord says all the wickedness began at Gilgal. There I hate them, I will dry them. And again, it's what we just read. Hosea also mentions Gilgal. If Gilgal is given to iniquity, becoming so what we, and here, for example, is a map of where Gilgals could be. So we don't know for sure where Gilgal is. We just know that from Hosea, it's where problems started. Now, if we believe that what he's talking about is that it had something to do with worshiping God in the wrong way, then it also maybe goes back to places that are listed in Joshua, because Joshua is the first book that happens when the people come in, where they come in. So what it's telling us is that, to some extent, what Hosea is saying, what we can tell from the context of what he's saying, is that your problems began the moment you came into the land. Like, as soon as you crossed the Jordan River, exactly, you were disloyal. You were doing bad stuff right away. And so God is punishing us from that already. It's just exactly. So another reference to the Bible, not exactly sure, which is why it says unknown, but I think you can kind of figure it out. It's not good, and it's clearly, if it's referencing the places that we know of at Gilgal that is referenced several times in Joshua, it seems like that's what he's talking about. But again, we don't know for sure. It's just bad, and it's probably the context of you've been screwing up since you came into the land. But again, think about this thing that's playing over in this text, which is giving birth, having children, being fruitful and multiplying, but also in the background, crops, agriculture, and all of this being connected. So here's what it says.
Ephraim is stricken, their stock is withered, they can produce no fruit. Even if they do bear children, I will slay their cherished offspring. My God rejects them because they have not obeyed, and they shall go wandering among the nations.
Yep. Now, that seems to be, again, it's foretelling the exile that the north is going to deal with.
But by this time, Ephraim has a temple in the north.
Yeah.
With two bowls.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And basically maybe the reference to Ephraim is really to all of the northern.
Oh, yeah,
kingdom,
for sure. For sure.
because they're the dominant tribe in the north.
Absolutely. And sometimes they use the word Ephraim, and sometimes the word Samaria, and sometimes they use the word Israel. And sometimes he says, and the southern, yeah, yep. And sometimes, again, as we've seen, you weren't there last week, but Judah is lumped right in with it. So, but this is not a real good break in the sense that the next line, which again, you could say, well, it kind of ends with they'll go wandering with among the nations, but this next line really goes with the previous text, because just as the first verse right away started talking about threshing floors and wine, or well, the first one was threshing floors, but then we get to wine presses. The first verse of 11, or excuse me, of 10 is also about wine. So let's take a look at
Israel is a ravaged vine, and its fruit is like it. When his fruit was plentiful, he made altars of plenty. When his land was bountiful, cult pillars abounded. Now that his brows are broken up, he feels his guilt. He himself pulls apart his altars, smashes his pillars. Truly, now they say, we have no king, for since we do not fear God, what can a king do to us? So they conclude agreements and make covenants with false oaths, and justice degenerates into poison weeds, breaking out on the furrows of the fields.
Yeah. So what, they don't have a king, and as we talked about, they had how many kings did they have in this 30-year period? They had like 6 kings in over 30 years. They don't fear God. They don't really care about what's happening to the kings. There's no sense of authority. There's no sense of hierarchy. There's no sense of any kind of system of keeping stuff together. And so that leads to this craziness of making covenants, making deals, especially with the Assyrians or the Egyptians or wherever else. Who cares? King makes it. We don't even care about our king. So what if he makes a deal? What does it mean? And again, here's an example of exactly what Ronnie was just talking about, references to the temples and the places in the north.
The inhabitants of Samaria fear for the calf of Beth-aven. Indeed, its people and priestlings, whose joy it once was, mourn over it for the glory that is departed from it.
Right. And so again, Samaria is the capital, and here's a direct assault on the cows or the calves, the golden calves. He calls it Beth-aven, which means like the house of destruction. But it's Bethel. He's playing on the word Bethel and changes it to Bet-aven, which he did back in 4. We already read that in chapter 4. So yeah, he's directly holding them, taking them to task for their temple. So again, even though he's in the north, even though that's where his home is, Hosea does not like the golden calves and the temples, the things that the north does. He does not like it. He does believe that Jerusalem, even though he lives in the north, he believes that's where the temple should be.
It too shall be brought to Assyria as tribute to a patron king. Ephraim shall be chagrined, Israel shall be dismayed because of his plans. Samaria's monarchy is vanishing like foam upon water. Ruined shall be the shrines of Beth-aven. That sin of Israel, thorns and thistles shall grow on their altars. They shall call to the mountains, bury us, to the hills, fall on us.
Yeah. So that phrase, again, that they're going to want to be dead, again, references to Bethel, Beth-aven. And again, here they use all the terms: Ephraim, Israel, Samaria. He uses all of them. They're all synonymous with Israel. Okay, you can see it very clear. The northern kingdom is referred to all of those things. So yeah, and the golden calves are going to wind up in Assyria. Assyria is going to have them as they're gonna be souvenirs that they take back.
You have sinned more, O Israel, than in the days of Gibeah. There they stand as at Gibeah. Shall they not be overtaken by a war upon scoundrels as people gather against them? When I chose them, I broke them in, harnessing them for 2 furrows. Ephraim became a trained heifer, but preferred to thresh. I placed a yoke upon her sleek neck. I will make Ephraim do advance plowing. Judah shall do main plowing. Jacob shall do final plowing.
Yeah, and here Judah is lumped in with it too. Here it's clear that Ephraim and Judah will be a part of it. And again, Jacob is synonymous with Judah, but it's also synonymous with both, because Ephraim and Judah are all part of Jacob's family, right? These are the tribes. They're all included here. What's interesting, of course, in this is that it's all about plowing. It's all about the agriculture. It's continuing this theme that we had since the beginning of this other chapter, chapter 9, about plowing. Here, we're compared to the cows, to the heifers that do this stuff. We're like them. And what's interesting, of course, is that we have these words in Hebrew, Arkiv, Yachrosh, Yisaded, Yisaded. We translated them as advanced, main, and final plowing. In Hebrew, they have 3 words for the different kinds of plowings that they do. We don't have those words. I'm sure in other languages where agriculture was a big part of their lives, they had different words we just translated them as the first plowing, the main plowing, the big plowing, and then a final plowing. But we just keep using the word plowing. They didn't have to, it's like the Eskimo words for snow, right? They have wet snow, thicker snow, whatever, they have a lot of words, but we just have to keep using adjectives to describe the snow. So they had these words. So it shows you that Hebrew didn't have a lot of words, but for things that they needed, and like we talked about how they have all these different words for a lion, they had different words for lions. We're not really sure. We usually translate the word, Ari, kfir, we translate it as like kfir is a lion cub. We translate an Ari or a gur, but like they knew what they were. We don't really know. They had a lot of different words for lions because they had a lot of them. They had these mountain lions that were all over the place. They're not all over the place anymore in Israel. They haven't been for a while, but they had words for it, and we just not exactly sure. Here's another example of, it's not a great translation. It's the best translation we can come up with because we don't have words for these in English. They did. So again, there's probably other languages. I'm sure there are other languages that have words that they would have used for synonyms when they translate the Bible into those languages. But again, Ephraim, Judah, Jacob, it works a lot better. It sounds a lot better when you can throw out different words and just keep using the word plowing over and over again. But you get the idea. And the theme runs throughout. You're plowing, you're going through the different stages of plowing or agriculture. You're planting, you're doing all these things, and it's all a reflection of how bad you are, because it's not going to come out good. You'll see this throughout the prophets. They talked in the language of what people were doing, and this is what they were doing, and these are the things they cared about. And so the prophets used terms that meant something to them, just like we'd come up with terms if the prophets were in our day, that we would come up with terms around things that we do. I don't know what they'd be, but they'd have something to do with your stock portfolio and your but this is the economic, and it's not just food for people. I mean, that's the thing I'm really trying to get through is this is what people cared about, not just because they cared about food so much. They were farmers, and they were even if they weren't farmers, they dealt with crops and they dealt with the seasonal life in a way that we don't think about. It was their livelihood, and it was their way that they made a life. And so that's why these images are so important. These are what people did.
We'd say stream righteousness and binge on goodness.
Yes, as Judith just said, autos, cars, vehicles. Yes,
Yes.
things like that. That's the things that we deal with today. So again, this isn't just food. This is about things that people do every day. So we don't think about it in those terms. All righty.
Back down.
Yep.
Sow righteousness for yourselves. Reap the fruits of goodness. Break for yourselves betimes fresh ground of seeking God, so that you may obtain a teacher of righteousness.
Yeah, that's a weird translation. And again, other people might have different translations for Yoreh Tzedek. But this is the good thing. This is what you are supposed to do. Again, using the images, the metaphors, the imagery of sowing and reaping. And this is the good way. We haven't had a lot of good lines, like what you're supposed to do. This is one of them. And again, it focuses on tzedek, which also don't know if it's necessarily reap the fruits of goodness. It can be reap the fruits of tzedakah, right? Of justice, righteousness, which again is the word down here too, tzedek. So yeah, that's the good thing, but you have not been doing the good thing.
You have plowed wickedness, you have reaped iniquity, and you shall eat the fruits of treachery, because you relied on your way, on your host of warriors. But the din of war shall arise in your own people, and all your fortresses shall be ravaged, as Beth Arbel was ravaged by Shalman, on a day of battle when mothers and babes were dashed to death together.
Yeah, now here's an interesting reference, right? So we don't know exactly what he's talking about here, but we think that he might be talking about this King Shalom, who went to war against his rival. And I will show you real quick what we're talking about here. When we talk about these kings of the north during the time of Hosea, King Shalom, again, was not good. None of these kings were good. These kings were all bad. So after this, from Jeroboam II all the way here, these are all, well, you can see from 782 with Jehoash, all the way here through to 740. Over that 42-year period, you have six kings in 40 years. It's not a good situation. And so these were people killing, Shalom killing Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam II. Yeah, Menachem killed Shalom. Shalom wasn't there for that long. You can see, technically speaking, over this 752, over this 1 year, you had 3 kings. So that's really the most violent period. So this is a reference to something that we know about in Kings, but we don't know the details. We don't have a lot of the details of what happened in the north, because it was the second king, first and second Kings. Those books were definitely edited by a writer, author, editor from Judah. And so there wasn't really a big focus on what's going on in the north, but we do know a little bit about the rivalry and the fighting and the assassinations. Yeah, and so that's probably what the reference is. So it is referencing something that's in the Bible, but we really don't have that part in the Bible. So, but he knew about it. Hosea, it happened in his backyard. So this was really bad. And again, you can see mothers and children were killed together. Ugh.
This is what Bethel has done to you for your horrible wickedness. At dawn shall Israel's monarchy utterly perish.
And again, you can see, it could be will do to you, will I do to you. Again, Bethel is the other name, or the main name for Bet Aven, which is what he usually calls it. But here it's definitely referred to as Beit El, which is the other temple site, one of the main temples. Bethel and in the city of Dan. Those were the temples that Jeroboam established. Now, that might be a break. That might be a decent break now, because chapter 11 does change a little bit the imagery. It does go into a slightly different format, and the imagery is different. And as I told you, we read about at the beginning of Hosea the comparison of us, Israel, Judah, Jews, and the relationship with God as a faithless wife to the husband being God. Now we move into this imagery.
I fell in love with Israel when he was still a child, and I have called him my son ever since Egypt. Thus were they called, but they went their own way. They sacrificed to Baalim and offered to carved images.
Yep. So it's very clear that the Baalim, the Baal gods, are not just a matter of gods worshiping the wrong God, it's also worshiping graven images, idols. It's very clear that's what they are. But again, the imagery now is of a child, of a son. That's the imagery that is now set up in this chapter, which is that Israel is God's son, but we messed up.
I have pampered Ephraim, taking them in my arms, but they have ignored my healing care. I drew them with human ties, with cords of love, but I seemed to them as one who imposed a yoke on their jaws, though I was offering them food.
Love this phrase, love this verse. Love this verse. It's one of my favorite verses in Hosea. One of the best images in the Bible, quite frankly, of our relationship with God. Anybody want to venture a guess of what's going on here? What's he talking about here?
He's saying that he offered them food, but they treated it, they took it as if he was clamping their jaws shut.
Yeah, but what is he talking? Oh, let's see if it even says here. Oh, yeah, here. So Rashi, according to Rashi and Kimchi, Rabbi Kimchi, yeah, what is going on here? Maybe these are ropes that parents would attach to their kids to help them walk. Now, it's not like what we normally would see today, which is a kid attached by a rope to a leash.
Keep them
It's
from
a
running
little-
away.
It's a little different. That's what, that's what I kind of figured. But no, in the ancient world, it seems as though they might have had things, at least in the Middle Ages when Rashi was writing, that they used things to help children walk, to help them get off their feet. Now, most people today would, probably since Dr. Spock, they probably thought that was not something you were supposed to do, rush your kids into walking, right? But they might have done that. They might have actually had a training type of situation where they would try to help the kid walk.
Jolly jumper.
Yeah, jolly jumpers. But this would have been something that they would have walked around with.
I was just hung in the doorway.
Now we don't know.
In other words, in the Middle Ages, infants used walkers, not old people. Right.
But there's some kind of training wheels, if you will, for the kid. But whatever they are, they're cords of love. They're supportive. Or at least Hosea sees them in their day, is they were supportive. They were supposed to be helpful. But what he says is that the people saw it as a yoke, which is interesting because, again, God's saying, I didn't mean it that way. I wanted you to feel like I was helping you, and you saw it as a yoke. But what's really interesting about this is that God is now projecting on us what our problem was with him, which is that you're controlling me, right? You're trying to make me do stuff. And God says, oh, you saw it that way. I didn't see it that way. And it's really interesting because when we think about anybody who's a parent who has to walk that fine line, and I'm laughing because I really want to cry, but when you walk that fine line between taking care of your kid and at the same time not trying to control their lives, any parent who's felt that, which I think is probably most parents, every parent, that's what God, that's what we feel God might have felt with us. I mean, we're projecting onto God. I mean, if assuming Hosea isn't hearing this from God, but if he did, then God just said this. But if Hosea is saying this as a human being, saying, I think this is what God must have felt like, it's, Hosea projecting on God what God projected on us. But that idea that God would have felt that way and that, did we feel that way, is an interesting idea. And it's one that only works, again, when we kind of put it in the context of parent and child relationship. And for parents and for even adult children like us, even if our parents are gone, if we felt that our parents were trying to control us, whether we felt that, again, that what they thought they were doing out of love was actually controlling us, and that they were trying to help us, but it felt more like, they were force feeding us.
Different take on
Yep.
Okay. We've been given 613 commandments to make us special people. Right? I mean, the rest of the world has, what, 7?
Yeah.
Now, I think Hosea is really saying, God gave us all these to make us special, to make us his children, to keep us different from other people. But you look at them as burdens and you want to assimilate like everybody else. I see this more as tension between assimilation and maintaining the identity that Hosea thinks is supposed to define Israel.
It could be. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it could be that assimilation is part of as part of this, right? It is in the background. Why are you behaving like everybody else? What I found interesting about it, again, what is our motivation for not doing it isn't necessarily the issue here. I'm just saying that God, at least what's been just given to us, is that God looks at the relationship that we have with God, is that God's looked at the work that God's done for us. God's doing it because, according to Hosea, it's out of love, but we feel it's control. And that, to me, is an amazing, very human and very powerful explanation of that, what that relationship is like between us and God, if as a child to a parent. Which what's interesting about it is, not all of us have children, but we've all been children. And not all of us, when Hosea talks about the relationship between a man and a woman, I mean, obviously the adultery and the stuff goes both ways, but it's very male centered, as God being the man and us being the woman. Not everybody is in a relationship as a husband and wife anyways. So, I mean, everybody gets it. I mean, everyone's seen the movie. Everyone knows what happens. But what's interesting is that everyone's a child, and everyone, even if they've never felt this as a parent, they have all felt it as a child. What it's like to be part of a relationship where you felt, gosh, why won't they just let me free? And so there's that relationship that we can see as a child, and feel this too. And then to some extent, if our parent tells us that and says, look, I didn't mean to control you. I was doing it because I wanted to help you. Again, it doesn't necessarily make it like you can forgive or just move on past that, but it does maybe give you some kind of insight and some, if you can empathize with that, again, sometimes it helps once you have kids and you know, oh yeah, now I get what my mom was trying to do. Or my dad was trying to do, whatever, but you don't need that. You can, just hearing that from somebody allows you to say, oh, I get it. We saw it differently. We saw it differently. And that's why I think that the phrase is so powerful, because it actually implies that people can see something differently. There's a perspective, even with God, there's a perspective where we say, well, that's not the way I saw it, God. And so that opens it up to, oh, I can have a relationship with God where I saw it this way and God saw it a different way. Oh, that makes sense. So I don't know. I find it one of the more powerful theological lines in the Bible, because it explains the relationship and explains differences in the relationship. It explains tension in the relationship, which it exists in other philosophies. You can spend, a lot of time reading metaphysical tracts and things like that, but sometimes just reading it in poetry, like he just gave us. Anyways, something to think about. Definitely, to me, it's like one of my standout lines in the prophets, and definitely in Hosea.
No, they return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria is their king, because they refuse to repent. A sword shall descend upon their towns and consume their limbs and devour them because of their designs.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add or maybe say with regards to what Ronnie said about assimilation, here there definitely seems to be that, but it's almost more political. It's almost like you'd rather not have a relationship with God. You'd rather be close to the Assyrians and the Egyptians, which assumes, maybe some assimilation, but it's actually more political. It's more about who's your daddy, right? And that's what he just said. Your daddy is Egypt and Assyria, which is also cultural, also assimilation is but there's a power dynamic there too. There's actually that's who you've placed yourself under the authority. And again, it's not going to work.
For my people persists in its defection from me. When it is summoned upward, it does not rise at all. How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How surrender you, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah, render you like Zeboim? I have had a change of heart. All my tenderness is stirred.
So this is part of this relationship of a father or parent and a child. And again, the references here to Admah and Zoim is Sodom and Gomorrah. These are part of the towns that were destroyed in the cities of the plain. That's actually not the reference to it. It's actually in Genesis chapter 19, but I'm not sure why it says that. But okay, maybe that's the first time. Yeah, in the discussion of wars against the wars of the cities of the plain against the kings of the east, it mentions Admah and Zeboim as the cities of the plain. That's what they're telling you. But again, the reference to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So Ephraim and Israel, he's saying, I'm not going to make you. He could have said Sodom and Gomorrah here. We have references in the prophets to that, but he actually referenced two smaller cities in the plain, Admah and Zeboim, which is interesting because it's almost like I could have said Sodom and Gomorrah, but I went deeper. I went to a deeper cut. I went to a deeper track. And they know, we know what he means by saying that. And so he said, I can't do to you what I did to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? I can't make you like them. I can't do to you what I did to them. I can't do it. And so it says, God says, I've had a change of heart. my tenderness is stirred. So this is also a theological issue, which is that God has plans that get changed. That's what the word hefach means. It was flipped. I changed my mind. I did 180, not a 360, right? I did 180-degree turn. My heart, I flipped my heart. My heart changed. Changed isn't actually as strong of a word as what it really. The word hepach means to literally flip upside down. Flipped. I was going to destroy you, and I'm not. I'm going to do the opposite. So, and it's because of my feeling towards you. So that's what Hosea has just laid down for us, which is that God would destroy us, but isn't going to destroy us. So whatever punishment's happening, it is not what was supposed to happen. It's supposed to be Sodom and Gomorrah-like destruction. That's not what's happening. So this is good. God's not going to do this because we're God's children. And so maybe, again, the relationship that we have, which is different than the relationship that God has with other nations, to go back to what Ronnie says, because we're not like those other nations, just a random place, we're not going to be treated that way. So, what'll happen?
I will not act on my wrath, will not turn to destroy Ephraim, for I am God, not human, the Holy One in your midst. I will not come in fury. God will roar like a lion, whom they shall march behind. With that roar, God's children shall come fluttering out of the west.
So, here's one of those lion references, but this is God as a lion. I'm not going to destroy them, which is interesting again, because God says, I'm God, I'm not human. So the implication here is that a human would not have done what God did, which is forgive the people and give them another chance. Human beings wouldn't have done this. A human being would have destroyed them and said, I can't do anything more. Just can't. But he's saying, I'm not, I'm God. And I'm not going to do what I should do.
They shall flutter from Egypt like sparrows, from the land of Assyria like doves, and I will settle them in their homes, declares God.
And that seems to be the end of a prophecy. When we get to a Ne'um Adonai, that seems to be the end. So if the whole last few chapters were all one prophecy, okay, so be it. But that's a really long prophecy. It's possible. But there also is this section we just read about, again, chapter 11 seems to be hopeful. Now, it's not, we're not done yet. There's still 3 more chapters. So 11 gives us hope, because it sounds like, oh, they're going to come back from exile, right? They're coming back. They're going to come back from Egypt. They're going to come back from Assyria, and they're going to come back home. Well, that also still implies there's the destruction going to happen. But there is a little bit of hope here. And so 11 kind of goes out of a little bit. It goes out of, like, there are people who say, why does it end? Why doesn't it end here? It should end here. It doesn't. And that's because, as we've seen from the other prophets, it doesn't usually end. I mean, Ezekiel does. Ezekiel ends with this restoration of Zion, the new Jerusalem, the new Israel. And it kind of ends with but most of the prophets, they don't exactly end that way. I mean, Jeremiah ends and we're really not sure, like, what happens. I mean, Jeremiah, we know from the other sources is that, he goes down to Egypt, but we don't, like, it doesn't end chronologically. So unfortunately, it's not like we're turning the corner yet. We'll see. You'll see what happens here.
Ephraim surrounds me with deceit, the house of Israel with guile, but Judah stands firm with God and is faithful to the Holy One. Ephraim tends the wind and pursues the gale. He is forever adding illusion to calamity. Now they make a covenant with Assyria. Now oil is carried to Egypt.
So again, Israel is making these deals with Assyria, with Egypt. Judah, though, is still doing the right thing to some extent. Faithful, right? And that's what it says. Yeah, I mean, translation, again, we talked about this before. The phrasing is weird in the sense that we're not exactly sure sometimes what the words mean, which is why it'll say something like, maybe meaning of Hebrew uncertain, but it's definitely juxtaposing Israel with Judah. Judah's been doing a better job. Now, let's read this next scene.
God once indicted Judah and punished Jacob for his conduct, requited him for his deeds. In the womb, he tried to supplant his brother. Grown to manhood, he strove with a divine being.
Now, this is a long, for the Bible, long explanation or recreation reference to something in the Bible, which of course is the story of Jacob. Again, in other texts, it doesn't say Judah there, it says Israel. We don't know, again, whether it's a mistake, whether it's a scribal error, but it could be, again, a reference just to Jacob and Judah, the Jewish people. But what it's actually talking about here is Jacob himself, our patriarch. And what's interesting about this section from Hosea is that at least in Hosea's mind, or at least the way God is telling Hosea, or however it's being told, Jacob is not a good guy. And what's interesting about this is that Jacob's not a good guy from the womb. Our ancestor, Jacob, is being dirted here. And that Jacob's life, which we know is not always very easy, was actually punishment for things that he did. So I'm going to tell you, as you read this, and this is a long, I'm hesitant to call it that, but other people have. This is a midrash on Jacob. It's a midrash within the Bible itself. This is telling a story of Jacob with a spin on it that's not necessarily in the Torah. You can derive this from the Torah, but the Torah doesn't necessarily say this. So it tells us that he tried to supplant his brother. Well, the Bible says that, but it doesn't really hold him accountable for that. He wanted to come out first. He held on to his brother's foot as he came out. He wanted to come out too. Okay. Then we know about the fact that he fought with a divine being. But that didn't see when he wrestles the angel. I'm going to just say here, this is chapters 25. That's his brother in the womb, and then 32 is wrestling with the angel. That didn't seem to be a bad thing necessarily. He was wrestling with the angel. Let's look at this.
He strove with an angel and prevailed. The other had to weep and implore him. At Bethel, Jacob would meet him, there to commune with him. Yet the Eternal, the God of hosts, must be invoked as God.
Well, what does this mean? It seems to indicate that Jacob didn't get this role that he had to play. He didn't understand what was actually going on with his life. That Jacob, at least according to what we're going to see, he doesn't get it at first. Like in our traditional midrash, Jacob is from the birth trying to do the right thing. He's dealing with a bad brother, Esau, and he's trying to stop the bad stuff from happening. When he steals the blessing, he's in the birthright, he's doing God's will. That's the traditional midrash on it. This doesn't seem to be what Hosea is saying. Let's keep going.
You must return to your God, practice goodness and justice, and constantly trust in your God. A traitor who uses false balances, who loves to overreach, Ephraim thinks, I have become rich. I have gotten power. All my gains do not amount to an offense that is real guilt. I, the Eternal, have been your God ever since the land of Egypt. I will let you dwell in your tents again, as in the days of old. When I spoke to the prophets, for I granted many visions and spoke parables through the prophets. As for Gilead,
Hold a second. So, this is, I'm going to let you,
oh, I see, I read it wrong, kind of.
yeah, they're all, um, this is God establishing the relationship. Here we go.
As for Gilead, it is worthless, and to no purpose have they been sacrificing oxen in Gilgal. The altars of these are also like stone heaps upon a plowed field. Then Jacob had to flee to the land of Aram. There Israel served for a wife. For a wife, he had to guard sheep.
So it's clear that we're still in the midst of this Jacob midrash. So what's he doing right now? He's telling us that, like Jacob, we didn't get it. And again, Gilad is the northern, another reference, another synonym for the northern kingdom. Gilad is up in the Golan Heights. And again, we've been sacrificing ox at Gilgal, which is a essentially a place we're not supposed to be worshiping God. But you can see it's a play on the word stone heap, because in Hebrew it's galim, kegalim. You've been going to Gilgal, and it's like altars of galim. And so it's a plural, it's a play on the word Gilgal. So these places that you've been offering up stuff, it's worthless. And again, it's in the middle of this text about Jacob. And when Jacob had to go to Aram, when he went to Laban and he worked for Laban and he got Rachel, he was supposed to get Rachel, he got Leah, right? And he had to do all that stuff. This is almost, again, he's running this narrative, this midrash, as he's telling the story of what we're doing. And Jacob is not, like us today, not doing what God wants him to do. And we're kind of being punished for it.
But when God brought Israel up from Egypt, it was through a prophet. Through a prophet they were guarded. Ephraim gave bitter offense, and his Lord cast his crimes upon him and requited him for his mockery.
Yeah. And the next, that's not a really good break necessarily of the chapter. It's where the chapter for us breaks, but the prophecy really continues. This section really continues. And again, it's difficult for us to understand why it's written this way, because it's jumping around. Some people say it's edited wrong. It shouldn't be like this section shouldn't be there. And I showed it to you last week. There was a section where people also said, well, that doesn't make sense. It should be 4-5. It should be 4. It was 4-6. It was the way it should be is 4-6-3-5, not 3-5-4-6. I mean, look, we don't know. It's either a corrupted text or it's a text that was edited in a way that somebody wanted to get some point across, or it's just a Northern Israelite tradition, which we just don't understand because most of our texts are from Southern Israel. And there's dialectical and stylistic and cultural differences that we just don't get. But definitely it's being juxtaposed, Jacob's story and what Israel's doing currently. Now, again, it talked about Moses right here. I brought Israel up from Egypt through a prophet, which, by the way, they didn't say Moses, but clearly, Moses. But yeah, it's a prophet. Now, that's another reference. It's another reference to the Bible, book of Exodus. But the Jacob one was a fairly long. The Jacob reference went on through several pieces of Jacob's life that we know about from Genesis. Getting the wife, in the womb, all of those stories were in Genesis. Again, I don't know what to tell you other than when people talk about how old the Bible is, and they say, well, the Bible was post-exilic, which means it's from after the exile, which was 586. It's sometime from the 400s. Hosea lived in the 700s. There's no reason to believe, based on the language, based on the style, based on what we know about Hosea, that this book did not come from the time of Hosea, of the time of Shalom. There's nothing to commend it to be have written in a post-exilic date. When people say the Torah was written at that time, I mean, it really doesn't, I mean, it could be, but again, it doesn't, the Torah didn't have to be written chronologically. But what we just read was a reference to stories that are in the book of Genesis, which are consistent with what we read in the book of Genesis. So I will only tell you whether or not the story of Jacob in Genesis was written by 722 or sometime during the time of Hosea, 750s, probably not 722 is like the terminus date of Hosea, because he's writing before the destruction of the north. Everything he's writing about clearly indicates the north has not been destroyed yet. So it means that the story of Jacob existed before 722. I don't know what to tell you other than that we know. So if you want to argue, and again, when I say argue, people like they battle over this issue of how old the Bible is or who wrote what source and all this stuff. There's people who, this is their lives. I mean, this is what they study all the time. This is, again, not definitive proof, but this is pretty good evidence that the story of Jacob existed before 722. I don't know what to tell you other than it's important. It's important because it is a source for the story. I mean, it is a source that proves that the story existed before 500. Okay? So it's not proof that it was written before, but it's proof that it existed before. The story existed before.
Is it possible that the people who canonized our Bible put this in specifically for that reason?
Could be, but it doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like the references are inserted because it seems as though that the narrative, like the way that he's using the story, seems to be the disjointedness of it. It doesn't seem to be reflected in somebody inserted that. It seems to be, again, because the language is the same. The language is the same. The same words are used, the same meter, the same. Again, probably a northern dialect, a northern Israel dialect. It's in that. So we're going to get to a line today, when we finish, that we know somebody added. It's just so blatantly added. But it's blatant. I mean, it doesn't mean that they couldn't have beautifully stylistically done it, but it's not likely. It's not likely that they did it. And so much of what we just read in these last chapters of Hosea are references to other parts of the Bible. So it doesn't appear that, it appears that a northern writer wrote this when there was still a northern Israel, right? So there's no northern Israel after 722. So a northern writer writing this most likely had a source. And we believe that a lot of the Jacob stories that are in the Bible were written by a northern source too. We believe that a lot of the Jacob stories were written by the northern writers. And we believe there's a northern writer. We call him E, the E author. The J author is the Judah author. The E author is the, you say he's from Ephraim, but we don't call him the E for that. We call him because he's the Elohist. He's the Elohim. He's the writer who writes Elohim, but he seems to be the northern writer. But anyways, the point is that it's very possible that he had the story from the E author. Or look, if Ezra edited the different sections together, it doesn't mean that the section that this guy had, that Hosea had, or he's learning this from an oral tradition. It seems as though there's a legitimate oral tradition. So Or again, that there's a basis for it in the north that is pretty close to what we have. We didn't read anything in the Jacob cycle that he just cited that we didn't have. So we're like, oh, yeah, that part about the wife, yeah, that's in there. The part about grabbing onto his brother's heel, oh, that's in there too. So it's pretty well. Again, do we know for sure? No, because we don't have a copy of the Bible from 2,700 years ago. So we can't say it's 2,700 years old. We can't. Nobody can say that. And we don't have it. We don't. So the oldest text we have that's roughly 2,700 years old, 2,600 years, is that famous text I told you about, the silver amulet that has the Birkat Kohanim. That's the only biblical text that we have that we can say, oh, that's in the Bible, that is written from that period, and that we can say, oh, that's before the exile. That's 100% like a quote from the Bible. It's in the Bible. It's there. It's somewhere else. It's written here on the text. It's exactly the same. That's it. It's the only one we can say. But that's a fluke. It was written on metal, and we found it, and it wasn't destroyed, and everything else. Not likely going to find anything like that. Not likely. Remember, it's 700 years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. That metal piece of silver. Rare. All right. So let's take a look at again, if this is not really a good break, which I would argue, or at least not a break of chapter or a break of idea. This chapter break here is kind of goes with the previous sentence. Okay.
When Ephraim spoke piety, he was exalted in Israel, but he incurred guilt through Baal, and so he died. And now they go on sinning. They have made them molten images, idols by their skill from their silver, wholly the work of artisans. Yet for these they appoint people to sacrifice. They are wont to kiss calves.
Yeah, well, there he goes against those calves. Really don't like them.
Assuredly, they shall be like morning clouds, like dew so early gone, like chaff whirled away from the threshing floor, and like smoke from a lattice. Only I, the Eternal One, have been your gods ever since the land of Egypt. You have never known a true God but me. You have never had a helper other than me.
And that is the words, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, Eretz Mitzrayim. I've been the Lord your God since you've left Egypt, as a people, right? Ever since you left Egypt.
I looked after you in the desert, in a thirsty land. When they grazed, they were sated. When they were sated, they grew haughty, and so they forgot me. So I am become like a lion to them, like a leopard I lurk on the way.
Yeah, I don't know. More lions and leopards. Not really sure. Namer is a word that we usually say is different than a lion. It's a namer is usually a leopard or a panther or some other kind of big cat.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Yeah, well, there's a bear coming up too, by the way. But the shakal is another word that they translated as a lion. Some people might have other translations for that phrase. Does anyone want to share translation they have for 7? Mary, what does the King Jameson say there for it?
It says, I will be unto them as a lion, as a leopard, by the way I will observe them.
So they went with both of those. So, I mean, look, I would say that there are probably 2 big cats that are not necessarily a lion, which is why I would, use something else besides a lion for the first one. But they also translate shachal as a lion. So it's one of the other words, Ari, Gur, Kfir. But a namer is usually translated as something else. But it's clearly not good. And so God is like a lion to them. It's not something you want to deal with, right? You don't want to deal with them. And as Rosemary just said,
like a bear robbed of her young, I attack them and rip open the casings of their hearts. I will devour them there like a lion. The beasts of the field shall mangle them.
Yeah, and there's one of those other words for lion, lavi. So we have these words for lions and scary animals that are going to attack you, and God is comparing himself to those, including a bear, which is going to tear open your rib cage. That's what it just said. That is a violent description of what God will do. I will mangle them like beasts of a field. This is the Hayot Hasadeh. These are not friendly animals. These are wild animals, and I'm going to attack you and destroy you like them. So as I said, this is not the kind of God that we're looking forward to dealing with. We don't want the God to attack us. The God that we are praying to, hopefully, is not going to attack us and rip us apart like a bear, an angry bear, a bear whose kids have been taken away. So it's a bear that is ready to go.
You are undone, O Israel. You had no help but me. Where now is your king? Let him save you. Where are the chieftains in all your towns from whom you demanded, give me a king and officers? I give you kings in my ire and take them away in my wrath. Ephraim's guilt is bound up. His sin is stored away. Pangs of childbirth assail him, and the babe is not wise, for this is no time to survive at the birth stool of babes.
Yeah, that's a weird phrase, right? And you notice it says, well, we're not really sure what this means, but it does seem to mean that it's not a good time to be around. It actually would be better not to even be born right now. And this is the punishment time. So we read God is going to not destroy us in the last chapter, and now all of a sudden God is destroying us. It's hard to kind of, why did they have that part? Chapter 11, and now chapter 12. Now we're in this part. It's not exactly the way we like to have it, but it's the way we have it. Yeah. And whatever punishment is happening, you can make the argument, which some biblical scholars do, which especially it's Christian and Jewish scholars. I've seen a lot of Christian scholars do it, which is chapter 11 is there to let you know that the chapters that are going to then happen it's going to be bad, but I already told you it's going to be okay. So it's kind of like, when you watch a prequel movie, you're going to wind up, they're going to wind up okay. It's one of the problems with any prequel, right? You know what's going to happen. You know the good stuff and the bad stuff. You know at the end of episode 3, he's going to become Darth Vader. You know that, but you also know that it's all going to be okay. Eventually going to destroy Darth Vader. So, that's the problem with the prequel. But he's told us it's going to be okay in chapter 11. So, I don't know. You could say that it gives us hope and makes us know that the stuff that's happening now, it's not going to be permanent.
From Sheol itself, I will save them, redeem them from very death. Where, O death, are your plagues? Your pestilence, where, O Sheol? Revenge shall be far from my thoughts. For though he flourish among reeds, a blast of wind of God shall come blowing up from the wilderness. His fountain shall be parched, his spring dried up. That wind shall plunder treasures, every lovely object.
Yeah, not a great break either. Because here we have this little section here in 14 where it basically says it's going to be okay too. It looks like you're going to die, but you're not going to die. You're going to get real close, but you're not going to die. And here Sheol and death are synonymous. So Sheol in this part of at least this time in this part of the north, whatever, we have what we have. But here Sheol and death, Mavet, are juxtaposed. And death is capitalized because it seems as though this is death personified, right? This is death or doom or the dark place. And Sheol is parallel, is the synonym here, okay? That's what it is. And it's not, doesn't seem to be good. Sheol doesn't ever really seem to be good. As a netherworld, it seems to be not the place necessarily that you want to be at. And here, you're going to get real close. You're in death's grasp. Well, I'm going to pull them out. And death is not going to have any power over. Now, one of the reasons why we now capitalize death and why we have better understanding of Sheol is because we have the Canaanite versions of some of these poems and songs that talk about death and Sheol as personifications of the gods of those things that are acting out. And so Mavet is an actual, or Mot, the god of death, is referred to in Ugaritic texts and Canaanite texts as an entity. And so death can be an entity. Of course, we know the angel of death, and some people say that some of that angelology and demonology is based on oral traditions and based on legends that go back very far, and that they're just there, they never go away. But that's why in this translation, you're going to have death capitalized. My guess is, Mary, that in is your King James capitalized death? The capital
It does
D?
not. It does not.
Yeah. So this is a little bit more of taking into consideration sociology, archaeology, anthropology, and understanding that maybe there was a time when the Jewish people saw death as an entity that has power, maybe given by God, but still is something that we are scared of. And, got to be careful of death grasping you, right? So, God's going to save you from that point. It's real close. You're not going all the way down. All right. So this is where chapter 14 begins. Again, not necessarily a break, but this is the last chapter.
Samaria must bear her guilt, for she has defied her God. They shall fall by the sword, their infants shall be dashed to death, and their women with child ripped open.
Yeah, this is the worst, and that's what it's there for. It's the worst imagery that you're supposed to ever have to think about. You shouldn't have to think about it. You should never have to imagine it. And of course, we've had it happen to us in the last 4 months. So, as horrible as we think that this is even to imagine it, it actually happens. It happened to us. And the people who did it didn't do it just because the people were in Israel. As they did it, they said they're Jews. And so this is, unfortunately, not just imagery that we graphically imagine and are horrified by, because it was videotaped. It was taken with people's phones. So, yeah, and that is supposed to frighten us. It's supposed to scare us. It is the scariest thing you can imagine. And so, what does it do?
Return, O Israel, to the eternal your God, for you have fallen because of your sin. Take words with you and return to God. Say, forgive all guilt and accept what is good. Instead of bulls, we will pay the offering of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. No more will we ride on steeds, nor ever again will we call our handiwork our God, since in you alone orphans find pity. I will heal their affliction. Generously will I take them back in love, for my anger has turned away from them.
And again, the people will get it. They'll finally get it, that Assyria is not going to save them, that the idols that they've been worshiping are not going to save them, right? That it's not going to be the sacrifices that we were making. It's going to be in a relationship with God. So this phrase, one of the more famous phrases, it's one from the end of Hosea, but it's one of the most Generously, I will take them back in love, which is, again, this not just an imagery of God forgiving us, but loving us.
I will be to Israel like dew. He shall blossom like the lily. He shall strike root like a Lebanon tree. His boughs shall spread out far. His beauty shall be like the olive trees, his fragrance like that of Lebanon. They who sit in his shade shall be revived. They shall bring to life new grain. They shall blossom like the vine. His scent shall be like the wine of Lebanon.
Yeah, Lebanon, really nice, right? It's making sure it's not so nice now, but back in the day, so Lebanon trees, Lebanon, Lebanon fragrances, Lebanon wine, all this beautiful stuff that grows up in the north. Remember, that area, at least according to Ezekiel and some of the prophets, because during the times of the prophets and the time of the northern kingdom, part of that Lebanon area was under our control. It was part of Israel. So it's not Lebanon because they never called it Lebanon. They called it Tyre and Sidon. Those were the Phoenician city-states that were held sway in that area. But for a lot of that time, Tyre and Sidon were concerned with the coastal parts of what today is Lebanon, near Beirut, that area. Whereas Israel controlled the northern part of the country, all the way, the northern part of Israel, the kingdom, went all the way into the Lebanon, went all the way into that area. And Lebanon refers to the mountains and into the areas of that country. At the time, Lebanon was not anything other than a geographical designation. It was not a political designation. Lebanon was not called Lebanon until the 1920s, until the French carved up part of Syria and made it Lebanon. It was not called Lebanon as a country. There was no country called Lebanon. So it's an area, it's a region. It's like Gilad. It's like Santa Clarita. Before Santa Clarita was a city, when it was just a valley. Now it's a political designation. No, it is an area. It was an area for them. And it was a beautiful area. And it was an area with beautiful trees and beautiful vines and that kind of thing. So here's what it says.
Ephraim shall say, what more have I to do with idols? When I respond and look to God, I become like a verdant cypress. Your fruit is provided by me.
Yes. Now, that's the last line of Hosea. It's not necessarily a great line, but it's part of this whole prophecy about being like the area will come back to life. And the cypresses are the big tree of Lebanon. Cypress and cedar trees, right? Those are the trees of Lebanon. And that's the cedar of Lebanon is on their flag, right? Trees are known as, those are cedar and cypress trees are really what they were known for. Cedars of Lebanon, it used to be Cedars of Lebanon. That's what the hospital was called before it was Cedar Sinai. It was a mixture, it was a combination of those two names, right? Mount Sinai Hospital and Cedars of Lebanon became Cedars Sinai. There's no Cedars of Sinai. It's stupid. It's two names that they combined. There's no Cedars of Sinai, but Cedars of Lebanon and the cypresses of Lebanon. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you is the line that was added. This was added.
The wise will consider these words. The prudent will take note of them. For the paths of God are smooth. The righteous can walk on them, while sinners stumble on them.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's nice. It's a wonderful saying. There's necessarily nothing to do with what just came before. So an editor added that. Wonderful. Probably the theory is, and I think there's a legitimate, I'm sharing with you because I think there's a legitimate reason to think that this happened. An editor from the southern kingdom, from the kingdom of Judah, from the people of Judah said, what a wonderful prophecy that we should listen to. We don't want to do the same thing that the people of the north did, which was not listen to this stuff. Let's listen to it. And what a wonderful message, because this is a guy from the north who got it. No one else got it, but he got it. And let's learn from him. So the editor just said, pay attention to what he just said. Pay attention to what Hosea just said. And it really is interesting because, again, it's somebody who wouldn't necessarily expect to say it. A guy from the north who called out the hypocrisy, the idolatry, all the bad stuff that they were doing. And again, Judah is sometimes brought into it, but Judah is oftentimes also the hero of the story. And it's definitely the responsibility for this idolatry is coming from the north. So you can see why this guy liked him. The editor liked him. We liked him. Hosea made it into our Bible, even though he's a northern prophet. And there are not a lot of northern prophets that made it into the Bible. Okay, they just didn't make it in. I will show you one more time before we go. And again, thank you everybody for being here today. We finished a little bit early because next week we're going to read the prophet Joel. Yes, there's a prophet Joel. Well, his name is Yoel, but yeah, there's a guy named Joel in the Bible. Here's the prophets from the north. You can see Amos, Hosea, Jonah, and Micah. There's 4 prophets, right? No, prophet Nahum. Daniel, yeah, he's Babylonian, but the fact that he came from the northern tribes are from that area. But these are the prophets that are living in the north during the time before the captivity. So, we read about Elijah and Elisha, right? We read about these guys. These guys mentioned just a couple times, Jehu and Micah. The original Micah, different Micah. These guys are the ones we're going to read. So we're going to get to Amos next, or not next, but after Joel. We're going to be in Amos, and then Jonah, of course, we read about in the book of Jonah. He's from the north, and he also is referenced in the book of Kings. That's why it says he's mentioned there. He's one of the only prophets, right, who's mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. Isaiah is mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, this guy. And you can see most of the prophets are in the south. So that includes Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the big 3 that we all read. There's definitely a Joel who we're about to read. They're not sure about Obadiah because he really is writing about the Edomites, but and these guys are Shemaiah and Hanani are mentioned in the Bible, but there's not books. They're not books that they wrote. So this is the prophets that we're going to get to. Most of the rest of the prophets, with the exception of, again, these few, are all they're all in the south. And again, Hosea is one of the earliest chronologically. So that is the book of Hosea, which is 14 chapters, the longest, just again to kind of give you as I told you, the statistics on how long these books are. Just pop this up for you. Thank you, Rosemary, for
Thank you, Mark.
us today. As we say, Tam v'neshalem tehillah el borei olam. We finish a book of the Bible. We can say, thank you, God, the creator of all. Here you can see the book of Hosea, which is 197 verses. The prophet Zechariah is slightly longer, right? It's a little bit longer. Zechariah is also 14 chapters, but a few more verses for each chapter. The prophet Joel, we're going to read the whole book of next week. We'll be in person again next week. Hopefully we'll have a few more people. You'll be able to come out of your homes dry after the flood, after the dove comes out. But yes, you can see the next prophet, Amos, pops back up to 140 verses. Probably be reading them over 2, maybe even into 3 weeks. But that third week, if we read Amos into a third week, we'll probably read 2 guys that week. Obadiah is only 1 chapter. He's only 21 verses. That's not even a very long chapter. And then, of course, we're going to read the book of Jonah after that, which we'll probably read in 1 day. We usually read it in about an hour and a half on Yom Kippur. That was about almost 6 months ago, so it's a good time to get back into Jonah, and we'll read it in a little bit more detail than we normally do. So for those who are worried that we're not going to learn something new in Jonah, I promise you, you will see something different than we did at Yom Kippur in Jonah, especially now after you've read these 4 prophets and then these 3 prophets too, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Again, this is the Catholic organization, which is why they have Lamentations after Jeremiah, because he wrote that. And the book of Baruch, which is not even in our Bible. That's in the Apocrypha. And then the book of Daniel, they include up here, even though Daniel, we include him in the Ketuvim. So this is a much different organization. We put Daniel here with the wisdom books. Again, the stuff in green, we don't even have those. Those are in the Apocrypha. So that is, yeah, that's where we'll be for the next few weeks as we go through the rest of these prophets. But they keep the same order that we do. And they actually, of course, call them the 12 minor prophets, just as we do. So the Christians continued that, that indication again of how long they are. But again, just to remind you, Ezekiel had 1,271 verses. Isaiah had 1,281. When you see how many verses they have, again, when you add up all of these verses, it's less than those. That's why, again, they're minor. They're very
Rabbi.
short. All right, yes.
Just a quick question, since you're
Yeah.
referencing the Catholic,
Uh-huh.
how do they, how do I word this right? How do they get to rewrite things? I mean, right? So
well-
we don't have it. So how does that happen?
Well,
How's
first
it-
of all, the bigger issue is that they wanted to include everything that we had, right? So they had to have all of our books. The reason that they included books that we don't have is because we felt that those books were either written too late or were not, they seem to have been written too late. Though, there's a question how late the book of Daniel was written. I mean, perhaps the book of Judith or the book of Tobit might have been written before Daniel, but they were written around the same time. For various reasons that we're not exactly sure of, Daniel did make it in. These other books didn't make it in, but they wanted to have everything that was in our Bible because they believed that if Jesus had the Bible, which they believed, then they wanted to have everything that Jesus could possibly have referenced. And so they didn't want to leave anything out. And it allows them to really do midrash to some extent, connecting parts of what Jesus says to other parts of the Bible. So when we do a midrash and we connect a verse of the Bible to something the rabbis did, they wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to be able to connect their words and to be able to have those same references that Jesus had. Whether Jesus had a Bible the way we had it, we don't know, because our Bible was canonized. So the rabbis argued over which books would be in our Bible. We know about it because the Talmud tells us. The books of the Bible, of our Hebrew Bible, were not picked until Christians already walked the earth, if you will. So this all was happening around the same time. The decision of which books to canonize, I'm not talking about the composition of the Torah. The Torah existed as a book, as a Bible. By the time of Jesus, 400 years before Jesus, the Torah was there. But the rest of the books of the Bible were not decided until the time of the Christians. So the fact that the Christians, there was some fluidity there, isn't really surprising because we were still deciding whether these books would get in. Some of them we kept and we didn't put them in our Bible, but we allowed them to kind of float around. But some of them we didn't even pay attention to. I mean, some of them, even though they were written by Jews, all these books in the green were written by Jews, but some of them we just didn't read. We didn't have copies of them anymore. And so the fact that Christians did this isn't really that different than what we were doing, which was we were organizing the Bible as they were developing. Now, they didn't really organize and decide what was in their Bible until about 200 years after that. They were still arguing about it. They were still arguing about canonization up through the time of Constantine. They were still arguing over what is going to be in that book. And then, of course, in the 16th century, 15th, 16th century, when the Protestants came along, they were like, no, we're not keeping these books. And so that's why the Protestants don't have these books as part of their Protestant Bible. So the Protestant Bibles, again, are different than the Catholic Bible. So you could argue the Catholic Church decided on what their books were going to be 1,700 years ago, and the Protestant churches decided what their Bible was going to be like 400 years ago. So there was still a canonization to some extent that took place in Christianity, while America was discovered. So, to put it in historical context, yeah, the canonization is, for us, canonization took 1,000 years. I mean, that's the important thing to understand. The editing, the writing, the editing, and then deciding this book is in and that book is out took us 1,000 years. It's a long time to make editorial decisions, which means a lot of people made the editorial decisions. A lot of hands went into that over time, which is why it's hard to know exactly what versions of texts were used. That's why we have the Septuagint. That's why we have the Dead Sea Scrolls now. We have other ways of checking. But for example, we talked about this before, the Dead Sea Scroll community, we've never found a text of Esther, which means that the people of the Dead Sea Scroll community had every other book of the Bible. They also, by the way, had some of these books. They had Baruch, for example. We don't have it in our Bible, but they had copies of it, where we found fragments of it. They also had the book of Jubilees, which is another book that's not in the Christian Bible, but is part of the pseudepigrapha, part of these books that were written by Jews that didn't make the Bible. They were the Dead Sea Scrolls, but they didn't have the book of Esther. They didn't have Esther. So some Jews at least hadn't gotten on the rabbinic canonization, right? And the Samaritans, for example, who we also know about, they had 6 books of the Bible. They had Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and the book of Joshua. And that's all they had. They didn't have the rest of the books, but they had those. And there's a Samaritan book of the Samaritan Torah actually has some good little differences that help us understand our Bible, by the way, our Torah. There's a couple of corrections or a couple of emendations that we've made in our Bibles based on the Samaritan copy. So
What's the Vulgate?
that's the Latin.
Saint Jerome.
That's the Latin copy. And what's interesting about the Latin copy is that he had different versions of the Hebrew Bible in front of him, St. Jerome.
He translated from Greek into Latin.
He did, but he also had Hebrew texts. So there are things that we have in the Vulgate that we think might have been either from communities like the Dead Sea Scrolls or from other versions of the Bible that we don't even know where they came from, that he had it in the Vulgate, that he had it, but the Septuagint is much older than the Vulgate. So that's a really good version of it. And of course, that is the Septuagint, besides the Dead Sea Scroll, is the earliest Bible version that we have a copy of, right? Because it's one thing to say, well, it goes back 2,000 years. It's another to actually open a book and say, that's a 2,000-year-old book. And so that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint copies that we have that are 2,000 years old are so important to us, because the oldest Hebrew Bible that we have that's like our Hebrew Bible is 1,000 years old. That's the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex. Those Bibles are the oldest Bibles that we have, and that's why those are so important. But there's a Septuagint. There's the Codex Sinai, the Codex of Sinai. Sinaiticus, that is one of the earliest Bibles that we have, and that's a Greek copy. And so
That was found in Greece?
no, it was found in Sinai. I mean, it goes back to the Sinai. It goes back. I didn't find it in the Sinai, but it was at the St. Catherine's Cathedral for a while at in the Sinai Desert at Mount Sinai. That's why we call it the Codex Sinai. But yeah, these Bibles are super, super valuable to us because they're like the oldest copies that we can say. Well, what does that copy say? What words? What word? How do we spell that word? All right, folks. Thank you again, and keep warm and keep dry. And we will see you in the coming days. We'll be back tomorrow night for a chance to study the Talmud. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Rabbi. Thanks for the
Bye-bye.
explanation.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.